We understand from the previous video that there are ways of explaining genetic traits. They can be explained as dominant or recessive. There's another term that is used to explain them, and this will also be applied in this case where we study the blood groups, and that is the term codominant. Codominant means that both traits are equally expressed in a ratio of half is to half, in a probability of 50% is to 50%. The blood grouping system is important for two reasons. One, it determines the immunological reactions during blood transfusion, and it is also important because it is used to solve legal disputes. In Form 2, you studied how bloods must always match during blood transfusion, and this is because different bloods will have different antigens and different antibodies. Basically, there are two main types of blood grouping system: the ABO and the rhesus factor. The ABO system is what gives us the blood group A, a person with blood group AB, a person with blood group O. The compatibility of these blood groups is what determines a universal donor, a universal recipient, and who can donate to who this particular blood. So these blood groups, they are normally determined genetically. We have people who are blood group A, and the reason is simple. It is because they have a gene that produces antigen A. People who are blood group B have a gene on their red blood cells that produces antigen B. People who are blood group AB, they do have two genes that produces antigens A and B. So these people who are blood group AB, they have two genes which are codominant. That means that these genes that produces our AB express themselves equally. They are codominant. A expresses itself 50 and B expresses itself 50. They are codominant. Blood group A, the gene for A is dominant. A is dominant and B is dominant. While those people who are blood group O, they produce no antigen at all on their surface. And also, this particular gene for blood group O is recessive. What does this imply? It implies that for it to be expressed, you must pair two recessive genes of O. Here is a visual of how these antigens are. You have your red blood cell. The surface has the antigen, but in the blood, we have our antigen, that's for blood group A. We have the antigen for blood group B. What happens is that when the body realizes that the surface of the red blood cell is particular antigen, they produce a corresponding antibody. Antibodies are produced by leukocytes, or what we call the white blood cells. And should the body produce antibodies that do not match with your blood, then the blood will clamp, because the red blood cells are going to do what we call agglutination. They are going to clamp together, they will clot, and this leads to death. So in the blood plasma, we have antibodies against a particular antigen. For blood group A and B, we have said that the genes for A and B are codominant and they express themselves 50-50. If you have this blood group, it means that you have no antibodies at all that corresponds to those antigens. And finally, for blood group O, which is recessive, they have antibodies but no antigens. That is the difference. Remember that blood group O is recessive. This is recessive. This is codominant, 50-50. Recessive, you must pair both O and O. If we look at the specific of how these antibodies and antigens are produced, we may not go into the details of that, but this is a little backdrop of what you've seen, that ABO are not sex-linked. These genes are not sex-linked. And ABO, of course, they are located in the chromosome like all the other genes. And this particular term, locus, means the specific position of that particular gene. A and B are dominant, while both AB, the genes, they are codominant. So a person will always have two copies of these genes. For blood group A, the gene can either be A and A or A and O. A and O because O is recessive. So we can either have this particular case of homozygous AA or heterozygous A and O because O is recessive, A is dominant over O. And if you have two people like this sweet couple here, Sarah and Mustafa, Sarah is blood group A and Mustafa is AB. Their kids can be either blood group AB, they can also produce A or even O, because for Sarah could be purely AA or A and O. Mustafa could be AB or could be BO or could be also BB. So their kids can inherit the O. They can also inherit both the A's. If you look at how they are inherited, we shall have this. We have our parent, allele, and then they have the genotypes. In this particular case, the genotypes in that order. If you have this parent, let's say this one is Mustafa and this going down is Sarah. Sarah produces A, the parent produces A, and we pair both A's. So one of the kid is blood group A. We can have another situation of AB. This is blood group AB because AB is codominant. And then we have A and O. A and O, in this particular case, the child is going to be blood group A because O is recessive. So this applies here. We have AB, A and B, the codominant genes. We have blood group B, both are homozygous dominant. And then we have blood group B, but with the gene for O. Remember, O is recessive. And then we have A and O. We have B and O, and we also have blood group O in their lifeline. And that is how the blood groups are inherited. The other system has something to do with the rhesus factor, and the rhesus factor, they normally have the rhesus factor antigen, or they do not have the rhesus factor. A person who has the rhesus factor antigen, they are called rhesus factor positive, and this rhesus factor is what determines if a person is blood group A positive or A negative. The people who have the rhesus factor are the majority in our populations. They are more than 80%, and the rhesus factor is dominant. So that antigen is dominant, and these people, they are more because they are dominant over the rhesus factor negative. It is normally denoted by these particular letters, the positive or the negative. So the rhesus negative, they are recessive, meaning that for a person to be negative, it must be homozygous recessive. For a person to be positive, they can be either homozygous dominant or heterozygous dominant in that case. And that brings an end to our discussion on blood groups.